Hi all, welcome to our lecture on music and gender. Today we're going to be talking about the ideas of masculinity and femininity in pop music for the most part, and kind of looking at a kind of a historical and more contemporary view of these ideas, kind of how kind of ideas become dominant, like masculine dominant, like hegemonic dominance, and how that kind of those images, those beliefs, those ideals about masculinity and also femininity, how they operate in the music sphere. I'm going to give you several different examples here to watch, and these are just again drops in the bucket. There are lots of other artists I could have chosen to highlight today, but I just want to encourage you to kind of do the reading for today, do this lecture, and then kind of use this type of thinking in your analysis and your kind of approach to new music as new artists create new things. Because as I said, every artist really is performing and kind of representing these ideas of masculinity, femininity, and trans ideology in their music and their art in different ways. It's not these particular artists in particular. And first, I wanted to start off with a great quote from the article you guys read. This is by the musicologist scholar Nina Eidesheim, and she mentions, and this is kind of just a reminder to all of us, really, that listening is never neutral. It's always actively producing meaning. It's always a political act, and that's just kind of one I want to kind of start us off there because I feel like sometimes it's easy to kind of say, oh, I'm just listening to this music is just something I listen to. It's not, the kind of deeper meanings we oftentimes address in this class seem kind of maybe added on to it. But I think if you really understand that every time you're listening to something, you really are in some ways subtly engaging with meaning. You're subtly kind of creating meaning for yourself. You're kind of imbibing the meaning that the artist kind of trying to imbue in their works as well. And so it's never kind of an innocent, devoid of any kind of outside influence type of act. It always is kind of there's always politics at play. There's always kind of a tension between different aspects in society. And I think if we understand that at every point in our musical careers, our artistic lives of listening to things, we're always engaged in producing meaning, and that has consequences outside of the music itself. And so, kind of starting from this idea, I want to move on and kind of discuss this idea of gender and masculinity and femininity in music. So one of the terms that was mentioned, and I just want to cover it a little bit because it's was a term that was used quite a lot in the 1990s and kind of fell out of favor after a little while. But this is the idea of hegemonic masculinity, and the way it was defined in the article you guys read was really this is strategies for maintaining men's dominant position in society at any given moment. And these are strategies, or images, these are beliefs about masculinity that really kind of serve to over time and kind of over in accumulation to reinforce and kind of make natural what we think of as naturally male or naturally masculine. It also makes natural a kind of male position in society, the dominance of society. And so I give you a couple different funny examples on the screen. The most recent Barbie movie, kind of the stereotypical masculine ideals from the 1950s. Advertisements, and Chuck Norris, of course, being the most masculine man out there, at least for some people. But I think these are all kind of just symbols of the way we understand the male ideal in society. And like I said, there are lots of other ones we could do too. This idea about masculine or hegemonic masculinities is really it's not just about kind of crude violence, although that could be part of it as well. But the idea behind hegemonic masculinities is really kind of it's a power. It's this kind of a subtle way of influencing people's beliefs outside of the kind of stereotypical kind of violent way. And another thing that's really important about it is that when you're looking at different images, music, etc., it's not that you can't just say this is hegemonically masculine, this is not. It's not an either or proposition here. I think you understand a lot of what we're going to be discussing today as kind of much more fluid. Like, to what degree does this piece of music participate or kind of legitimate ideas about masculinity or femininity, but especially about to what degree does these artists and how they actually kind of subtly reinforce these ideas about what it means to be appropriately male in our society. And so I want to ask you guys before we go on, can you think of some other examples in contemporary society of how hegemonic masculinity or kind of dominant masculinity operates? Again, thinking about the examples that were given to you from the article you read for today, but there's lots of other examples out there we can talk about how subtly influencing everyone's ideas about masculinity is really it's pervasive throughout society. And so you can, I'm sure, think of many examples in our society today that are examples of how this kind of ideology is perpetuated. And so I want to turn to one of the images that was kind of central to the arguments made in the article we read for today. And this is the cover of GQ, Gentleman's Quarterly, this about 2019, where it was kind of devoted to this idea of new masculinity. There's this really kind of an effort to shift the ideal by GQ to kind of shift the ideal away from kind of the traditional norms of masculinity that have been displayed on their covers for decades. And really their idea of this new masculinity issue was to kind of explore ways, this is a quote from the article, explore ways that the traditional notions of masculinity are being challenged, shifted, and overturned. And in this picture they showed was this, rapper, artist, musician Pharrell Williams, dressed in this kind of puffy coat / dress, striking image here, and kind of displaying a new way of what it means to be masculine in our current society. And I think what you got from the article really also is some critique of this idea. It really a couple different reasons why. In some ways, yes, this is a very different way of being a male on the cover of GQ, right? It's not your traditional like it has been in the past. But I think also in some ways the article is critiquing this in the ways that Pharrell Williams kind of distances himself from really, truly changing, the image of what is masculine through his music. Also, there's a few critiques of this saying, this is only something that's available to the uber wealthy. The coat is $8,000, right? He's wearing almost $1 million watch, etc. And so, kind of the kind of celebrity and wealth are huge factors that really enable whether or not the public accepts these new performances of masculinity or masculinity of identity. And I think I should ask you: is this image is this image you're seeing on GQ, or is Williams being noticed for this kind of new masculinity is new? I think he is. It's also displaying, it's kind of continuing the conspicuous displays of wealth that are really ingrained in the hip hop sphere. But I think how much does this image really shift the idea away from the hegemonic masculinity or the traditional masculinity? And I think if you look at his the way he kind of frames this kind of new adventure he is showing here, he kind of backtracks a little bit in terms of how he discusses masculinity. He says, there are certain lines he wouldn't cross. He wouldn't be seen wearing a skirt, right? So there's certain ways that he's able to push the idea of what is masculine, and certain ways there are certain lines he wouldn't cross. And I think one of the more important ways is actually how he frames his masculinity in music, and this is mentioned again in your article, in his performance with Migos in the video Stir Fry. Again, there's a lot of language and lyricism there, which Pharrell Williams co-wrote with Migos, that again reasserts kind of a very much of a hegemonic masculinity in some ways, and so some ways kind of compartmentalizes this type of new exploration of masculinity that you see on the cover. I think it's compartmentalized by Williams's other performances in his music, and we'll turn to that next. So here, I want to have you guys pause for a second and watch this video. This is Stir Fry by Migos, again, co-written with Pharrell Williams. And while you're watching this, watch how masculinity is displayed in the video. How is it displayed visually? How is it displayed lyrically? Again, this is mentioned in the article, so you'll probably have some clue about this. But again, see how masculinity is framed in this way, and then we can kind of use this as a way to kind of understand, or at least place in context, the kind of new masculinity issue, GQ issue that Pharrell Williams was featured on. So take a break from the lecture and come back, and we'll discuss the kind of what you saw. So again, watching that video, it's kind of, again, there's all sorts of displays of kind of very much traditional masculinity, even that the kind of crude violence you see here of like, kung fu fighting and things like that. But I think one of the lines there you hear in there about kind of the lines you hear the rappers reciting about dogs and hoes and things like that really kind of brings back this idea of kind of really kind of standard hegemonic masculinity you've heard and experienced in hip hop videos for a long time. And I think this was one of the critiques of the article you guys read, that Pharrell Williams, this new masculinity, that doesn't actually do a whole lot to challenge this idea of hegemonic masculinity when he is framing himself in these terms, in these kind of standard kind of dominant traditional masculine terms in the videos that he produces. And so I want to turn to one other video we've seen before. We watched in our lecture on music and race. I know you can watch it again if you like, or just watch portions of it. But in terms of, I wanted to show you an earlier example of something similar happening to kind of the framing of masculinity in particular ways, and the kind of maybe what might seem challenging to kind of traditional masculinity in terms of, in this video, this is Aerosmith and Run DMC's kind of collaboration. You have two very different displays of what it means to be male on the screen. You have kind of Run DMC in their clothing. You have Steven Tyler in his, and it's quite strikingly different. But I think maybe if you look at Steven Tyler, maybe even if you could see it as even his challenging of kind of a hegemonic masculinity, I think again that is being framed in the kind of lyrics of the song you're listening to. And so my question is, how does this video challenge masculinity, or is it reinforced the hegemonic masculinity, or is it challenged in this video? So again, watch a little bit of this, come back. I gave you some lyrics here, just a few of them on screen you can read through, but in many senses, I would say in my analysis that despite the kind of the clothing Steven Tyler is displaying and flaunting, and even the contrast that he has with the artists of Run DMC, I think any kind of challenge to that kind of hegemonic masculinity is really mitigated or kind of lessened by the reliance on these kind of overtly heterosexual, misogynistic lyrics that you're hearing throughout the song. And so, in some senses, you could see this as two different masculinities operating in a video. In other ways, you could see again how it's being framed by the music and the lyrics itself, how masculinity is not being challenged maybe as thoroughly or as strongly as you might perceive on the surface, right? So let's move on to the next example of we'll talk about for other masculinities. This is another famous example of Harry Styles, on the cover of Vogue, again, really put out there as a way to kind of challenge this idea of what it means to be male in our society. And this is him obviously wearing a dress and kind of a structured coat. And I want to just ask, do these kind of new masculinities, if they challenge hegemonic masculinity, or how do they challenge masculinity, or kind of traditional senses of masculinity? So this Vogue article was incredibly popular. Really kind of struck up a conversation about what it means to be an artist, what it means to be a male in contemporary society. I think this, from the article, again, there are a few examples or strategies that can be used by people fairly regularly in terms of how they challenge this traditional sense of kind of institutionalized gender norms and things like that. And this is a few of those things were mentioned were kind of this discursive distancing, the strategic borrowing, and kind of the fortifying of particular boundaries. And so if you think about those, kind of how these challenges are coming kind of more and more frequently, I think, throughout society. I think you look at how artists are maybe kind of pushing against the idea of one singular masculine ideal, and maybe expanding the concept outward a bit. And I think Harry Styles is a good example of this. I think you can see the kind of, again, just like Pharrell Williams, you still even see some issues with this stylization on Vogue with Harry Styles. You see this kind of the challenges to the kind of ideal or kind of the hegemonic masculinity are oftentimes caught up with issues of power, privilege, and money. So Pharrell Williams had, again, this extravagantly expensive outfits. Harry Styles is certainly using the power of celebrity, and he's able to do this, as a celebrity. He's able to kind of challenge these notions of masculinity and be celebrated for it. As you probably imagine, this wouldn't go well down in a small town in particular parts of America. I think if you're not a celebrity, if you're not someone with kind of already that set of those advantages that Harry Styles and Pharrell Williams have. And so I think that again complicates this idea of how do artists challenge, and how to what degree are they challenging the hegemonic masculinity of the time. So that said, I want to turn to Harry Styles' video song "Watermelon Sugar," and I want to have you guys watch this, and particularly watch it with an eye for how gender norms, how gender identity, how masculinity, in a sense, is being challenged or reinforced, or how is Styles engaging with this idea or the ideas of masculinity and identity more broadly in the video. So take a minute here and watch "Watermelon Sugar" and come back. So I think you saw in that video a really a really interesting take, I think, on gender in some ways, and kind of sexuality, and kind of the openness that he approaches this idea of sexuality and gender in the video. I think you have subtle reinforcements of the kind of hegemonic masculinity in the video. There's oftentimes the female body is still used as kind of a decorative thing where they're mostly almost naked in some senses, while the male body is used to a lesser degree in that way. But again, you have all these different images kind of right in your face here in this video. I think that really kind of shows how Styles is negotiating this idea of sex, gender, and masculinity, femininity in Watermelon Sugar. So I want to turn now to another kind of, as we move forward through time here, and talk about issues of masculinity. Another great example of artists who are, again, challenging the kind of hegemonic masculinity and the male kind of traditional ways of thinking about being male. And this is the K-pop group BTS, who are well known for their kind of challenge to this ideal. There's a lot of talk in how they've really been pushing this idea of soft masculinity. They've been much more open about coloring their hair different, nice shades of different colors, using wearing makeup, jewelry, etc. Things that are not typically considered a part of that hegemonic masculinity. They're also really well known for speaking out. They've given two talks to the UN about kind of self-acceptance, self-love, and really have been well known for trying to not necessarily reject, but at least push a different way of being masculine in contemporary society. And so I think they're kind of they've actually mentioned that this idea of what being masculine is actually kind of an outdated concept, that their intention is not to break down this entirely, but make a positive impact on people's lives and really make people much more accepting of different ways of being in the world. And so I thought we should look at this video here of Dynamite and see again, how are they presenting themselves, how are they altering what it means to be male in society. And this is again coming from Korea is well known to be kind of a very kind of rigid and traditional society, and so this is a huge deal for BTS to kind of be pushing these ideals and being so successful at it too. And so I think that how they do it visually, how they do it with their personalities, how they do it lyrically, etc., is all really important in terms of how BTS is pushing this idea of soft masculinity, how they are challenging the traditional dominant hegemonic masculinity through their music. So take a moment there, appreciate this the Dynamite video, and come on back. And so I know we've been bouncing around through time and kind of talking about different ways that musicians and artists kind of challenge this idea of male dominance. And I want to kind of go back in time just a little bit, a few decades ago, to look at the Riot Grrrl movement and look at how they were making challenges to the idea of femininity in their time. So far, the artists I featured, they've to various degrees kind of challenged this idea of hegemonic masculinity through their fashion, through their lyrics, through their message. They're chipping it away at kind of the dominance of this kind of once singular, if never really singular, but at least once kind of in at least the media representation of masculinity, one singular ideal of what it means to be male. Even if like in the Pharrell Williams case or in other examples, how even if they're leaving aspects of hegemonic masculinity in place, they are shifting the conversation away from this kind of singular dominance of one ideal and kind of making space for other ways of being masculine. I want to turn that idea kind of now to the idea of femininity very briefly for the last parts of this lecture, and see how other artists challenge in some senses and also kind of reify or kind of reinforce the performance of gender in their music. And I thought a great example of this would be the Riot Grrrl movement from the 1990s. That really kind of was an example of a kind of third wave feminism that really attempted to create a new way for females to exist in the space of punk rock, and most importantly, to be heard in the space of punk rock. So I'll have you pause for a second here and watch a really brief little clip on PBS about Bikini Kill, and a few other bands here about from the kind of inspired by the Riot Grrrl movement. It gives you kind of a little bit of a background history of it, and then come back to this lecture. And so I think you saw a great example of Kathleen Hanna speaking there. Some other kind of the Linda Lindas, the newer wave of kind of punk rock Riot Grrrl-esque, kind of Riot Grrrl inspired artists. And I think you see again this challenge towards what it means to be feminine. If you know some of the history of the Riot Grrrl movement, it was really pushed by female artists who were really upset by the kind of the lack of representation in space that women had in the punk rock. In the punk rock genre, there was a lot of controversy surrounding some of the artists. Some of the controversy stemmed from kind of a perceived lack of inclusivity, so that maybe thought these were just like white middle class women singing about white middle class issues. But really, despite being kind of regularly demeaned during their performances, I mean, men would hurl really vulgar insults at many of these artists, including hurling chairs and things like that at their performances, and also for some of the issues along with these artists, men yelling at these artists to take their clothes off, and the really kind of quite misogynistic ways of being a kind of abuse that these artists took. These artists really tried to flip the tables on punk rock and society's kind of patriarchal dominance. They were shouting their defiance through their music. They were saying, in their message, they're asking men, as you saw in the video, men to step back and the ladies to step forward. This is still even controversial today, even though we've come, I think, a long ways from where society was in the 1990s. But again, I think you see this way of kind of pushing against these ideas of what it means to be a woman, what it means to be feminine in the music space. And I think the Riot Grrrl movement and these artists in particular are really showcasing this quite well. And the last video I want to highlight here is, again, skipping forward a little bit in time, not quite contemporary yet, but this is Nicki Minaj's Anaconda, a video song that generated a huge amount of controversy and praise. And I want you guys to look at this video before I start speaking more on it. Watch the video, watch the visuals, watch the lyrics, and again start thinking about this video in terms of what is it saying about femininity, what are the messages that are being pushed, and how are they being pushed, being pushed lyrically, visually, all those things. And so kind of think about those issues while you watch, and then come on back and we'll discuss a little bit more. So I think, as you saw, it was quite in your face, right, about a lot of different things. This was seen by many as a kind of an anthem for body positivity for Black and brown women. It was really a challenge to this kind of skinny white girl aesthetic that still really dominates the American kind of entertainment space. But Minaj was really heavily critiqued for this song. A lot of people critiqued her for continuing to link kind of the female body with continuing to kind of objectify the female body, continuing to link the female body to sexuality and availability, also continuing to kind of exoticize Black bodies, and for also the continued some of the hip hop stereotypes that have been so long lasting in hip hop that kind of glorify the conspicuous displays of wealth, of sexuality, of drug use, of the female body as being kind of a display thing. So this is all the kind of controversy this video generated when it came out, but it also generated a huge amount of kind of thought about how she was really pushing against this idea, the stereotypical idea of femininity. She in the video, you saw a lot of ways she was doing this. She was doing this by lyrically, by kind of asserting her dominance over everyone else, and especially men in the video. I mean, her giving a lap dance to Drake there at the end was really her, being in that dominant position. She's kicking him over, etc. I think you probably caught the idea when she was, being the kind of quote unquote stereotypical housewife in this video, when then she, snips the banana in half, and it's quite, I think, quite direct in the meaning, in her meanings there for the ideas of who's in control, who's dominant in this video. So I think you see a lot of different ways of how Minaj is pushing against this idea of femininity, and a lot of the flack she got was as a result of this. I think it's a great example of how artists, in some senses, no matter what, artists are being critiqued, but in some senses they're pushing against the kind of dominant ideals, and in other ways they're subtly reinforcing them. So I mentioned, objectification and sexuality, at the same time also her kind of asserting her dominance through lyrics and through visuals, etc. So you see kind of both worlds operating, and I think you see this with most artists out there. Pushing and being pulled by their ideals and by society at the same time. So we've had a bunch of different examples. We've had, had you read an article about this idea of hegemonic masculinity and the idea of how gender is being framed through music, through the actions of artists on screen, in their music, and outside the music as well. But I think for all this talk of kind of the kind of hegemonic masculinity and the essentialisms about femininity, etc., most scholars and most people I think around in this country really agree that these ideas are not fixed. They're certainly in constant negotiation. I think it's very well understood that identity is not a static thing, that most aspects of our identity are performed depending on the time, the place, the company you're in, your needs, your desires, etc. And I think that as seeing identity, gender, etc., as a performance, you can also see how music is able to offer the space for people to try on new aspects of themselves. And so it's a way, music in a very visceral way is a way for us, all of us, to experiment and explore different ways of being in the world. And so I think having seen these examples, having listened to the analysis, having thought about this, I urge you to kind of think about if and why and how music continues to challenges these ideals about like hegemonic masculinity, how artists use their platforms to open up space for new conversations and confront head-on or maybe subtly even shift the dialogue surrounding what's considered acceptable and normal in society, and the way that they're being constrained by these ideals, or these kind of the hegemonic masculinity or ideals about traditional femininity, how these are still drawing and there's just a constant tension in the art we see being created these days. Again, this is not the end of it, right? My whole idea with these lectures is for you to take these ideas and then apply them to the things that you are most interested in, the things that you find most current, and see how things are operating, analyze them again through these lenses, and really think about the meaning and how things are being accomplished in the music that you listen to, and see if you can find new meanings and new understandings of how our world is operating. So thank you very much. If you have any questions about things, for sure email me, and I look forward to seeing you, or look forward to being with you in the next lecture. Thank you.